Welcome to Artificiality, brought to you by the founders of Sonder Studio. Artificiality is a podcast dedicated to understanding the emerging community that is humans and machines. We take the latest in the human side, decision science, psychology, and design, and put it together with advances in artificial intelligence and big data so that you can understand how to work better with machines and your fellow humans. We founded Sonder Studio to help people be more human in the age of AI. We're on this learning journey too, so we strive to find the frontiers, to ask the best questions, and stay curious. We interview some of the top minds working at the intersection of humans and machines and make sure we have a few laughs along the way. Have you ever wondered what it means to be a humanist in the age of technology? How can we put human values into a machine? How can we even know what those human values are? We asked Kate O'Neill, founder of KO Insights and author of the Tech Humanist, this question, and found that there's a lot to work with when it comes to understanding humans and what they might want their machines to do. Kate, thank you very much for joining the podcast. We're happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
Maybe just start off with telling our listeners what a tech humanist is.
When I think a tech humanist is someone who is thinking about the implications of technology, especially more and more emerging technology, on humanity in various ways. And in my book, Tech Humanist, what I'm really concerned with is the fact that most of technology meets the mass market through business. And so I'm trying to reconcile this sort of three-way relationship between business and humanity at large through technology, and making sure that those things are somehow in alignment, that business objectives can marry up with human outcomes, and that technology can be used to amplify the alignment between those things.
That's an interesting thought, to amplify the alignment. Can you keep going on that?
Yeah, sure. So, what I think it seems like a lot of what works well for the business to human relationship is to really think about what need business is solving for humanity, like where you're meeting someone in the world, like when a person comes in the role of customer or in the role of user and they interact with a business. They're coming with some sort of need and some sort of context, and that context is often emotional, or it is, a context that is, let's say that you have a loved one in hospital, and you are trying to figure out, how do you get to go visit them? What are the visiting hours? What's the map of the hospital? How do you navigate all of these complexities at a moment when you're also very stressed? And what technology should be able to do is look for that place where the business of the hospital or the healthcare system or whatever is best serving the human who's both the patient and the person visiting the patient, all those roles that humans are in, and looking for ways to ease that, to bring, more of a sense of, I think, in user experience and customer experience, we've talked a lot about this concept of delight, but delight is really only one of the sort of emotional outcomes, you could say. It could be just comfort or convenience or security or, something that feels like it's a human kind of reaction to whatever the context or situation is. And technology can really provide that if it's designed that way. If the experience that's being created for the human relative to the business function or relative to the way, entities like businesses or organizations or cities or museums or whatever are putting out these experiences, if they're using the technology that infuses those experiences to create those more meaningful, dimensional, relevant experiences for people, then they're going to be making their own businesses better, more profitable, more efficient, and it's going to be making humanity better off at scale.
What is it, when you're talking about being a humanist, what does it mean to be human? And how is that changing through technology, but especially in the world of big data and AI?
Yeah, so I think of being a humanist is, to me, not it's not a religious affiliation. It's not even something that requires any kind of political orientation. It is simply the sense that humanity somehow matters. It doesn't mean that humanity matters more than other life forms on this planet, but that we are special. I think it's relatively universal amongst humans to be able to acknowledge that we are somehow special amongst life forms, and we should be making sure that we are not endangering ourselves, that we're recognizing the humanity in everyone else that is human on this planet, which is something we don't often do. So I think we need to do better at that. So that's one way I think of humanist mindset. But then I think what it means to be human is recognizing this complexity, like what does make us different? Why are humans special? And it is this consciousness that we have. It is this this sense that this higher reasoning and all the different faculties of our mind and our imagination. And one of the things that I do when I speak to audiences, used to be in person, it will be in person again starting in September. All of my bookings are in person, so fingers crossed. Yeah, thanks. I'm really looking forward to that. But even in the virtual sphere, when I have virtual keynotes, I love to ask people to just type one word into the chat. So I'll ask, what for the people in the audience is the one word that really encapsulates what it means to be human? And there's usually sort of two buckets of answers. One bucket, or sort of super category of answers, is about creativity or problem solving or innovation or how we think on our feet or whatever. So that's an interesting bucket. But I don't necessarily find that to be uniquely human, since we know that non-human animals kind of use tools to solve problems in some cases. And certainly I think we could think of machines as solving problems, maybe not in a creative way in the way we would classically define it, but there's a sort of philosophical argument there. But then that other category or super category of answers is about emotion and compassion and love. And that's a really compelling answer, and it's one of the more beautiful characteristics about humans. But I also argue that it isn't an exclusively human characteristic either, that non-human animals are able to exhibit traits that look like compassion or that feel like love to us when we really study them. And I think that ultimately we may see machines able to exhibit some of those characteristics too that seem like caring or compassion. So the one trait that I'm left with that feels like it is really the uniquely human trait is meaning making and meaning seeking. And I think for a lot of people, meaning just feels a little squishy and vague, and they don't know what to do with it as a construct. But I am a student of meaning my whole life. I was a language major in undergrad and graduate school, and I've just been fascinated with meaning all my life. And I think there's a really rigorous, disciplined way to think about what meaning is, from the most sort of fundamental semantic linguistic layer of what we're trying to communicate when we speak, all the way out through, sort of more and more abstract or macro sorts of ways of thinking about meaning, which have to do with relevance or purpose or significance or truth, out to like existential and cosmic meaning. And at every level that we talk about meaning, we are always talking about what matters. And so it's this really innate ability that humans have to kind of cut through abstraction and think about what matters and understand that in any given context. And that is not, at that level of abstraction, we are not aware of any other animal that can think that way, that can function in that level of abstraction. And so far, machines are not able to do this kind of nuanced processing that really puts that in context that way. So I think that that's going to be our most human characteristic for an awfully long time, as long as any characteristic will. And I'm really sort of bullish on meaning as this marker of humanity and human activity.
There's a lot to go through there.
Yeah.
And so there was one thing you described, which is almost these layers of meaning. It could be something simple like the sky's blue, so therefore it's a sunny day, right through to what's the meaning of my life or humanity in the universe. But so when you think through those different layers, and you ascribe almost this sort of relevance of meaning or layer of meaning, if you like. Are you talking about having a view of meaning that is sort of particularly context dependent when you're when you're thinking about technology, when you're thinking about like a design process? If you go back to that hospital example,
right?
That one you described as, okay, so we're solving for emotion at this in that particular case. So how do you use meaning as a flexible design target?
So in that case, I would say what the aspect of meaning that you're using is relevance, and it's being able to sort of deconstruct every facet of that interaction to what is going to be the most relevant, because emotion, because anxiety, because all these other human emotions are in play. We want to make this as simple and as streamlined as possible. Therefore, relevance is going to be, the key, the way in to creating the most meaningful experience between the hospital in this case and the patient, or the patient's visitor, or so on. I think, if you took schools and students, you could be thinking more about what some level of meaning that has to do with like patterns, pattern finding or pattern making, or recognition is a form of meaning making and meaning seeking, and being able to teach students the ways of pattern recognition in the world and what matters in that context is another way of breaking that down. So in my second to last book, Pixels in Place, I had laid out a methodology, a framework for designing experience using meaning as a construct. And that framework is called integrated human experience design. And my friend refers to it as IHEAD. My friend Jeffrey Zeldman, he refers to it as IHEAD. So I've thought that was a pretty funny acronym. So yes, IHEAD, I think is what I would be using there to kind of to look through different lenses and say, how do I make this dimensional? How do I make this, relevant? How do I make it integrated between online and offline experiences, and make sure that, we're making, using the data that we're collecting in various parts of the data trail, the sensor kind of capture, or the pathing through different web properties or whatever. How do we make sure we use that data to provide the most relevant or dimensional or whatever offline experience too? What are we doing to make sure that those are in sync in some way? And there's other, facets of IHEAD as well, but that's how that breaks down in an actual very practical way of being able to use meaning to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct what those experiences and what experience design and strategy should be like.
I find it interesting. You talk in your book about wanting to automate meaning. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges clearly that comes up there is automation tends to work best when it can be one solution for all, right? So a simple thing, an escalator automates the movement of a person up a floor. As long as you can stand and you don't need an elevator, it works for you. Then you get into these things where meaning can be quite individualistic, right? So, and over the weekend, I was listening to an interview with a linguistics professor that was it was talking about the fact that different people on opposite coasts communicate very differently. And you being someone who's lived on both coasts, I'll give you the premise here. Basically, her whole work started with this a Thanksgiving dinner party with people from California and people from New York. And the people from California had one pattern of speaking, and they'd wait for the other person to say something. And the New Yorkers are just jumping on top of each other. And not only, and that it meant different things to different people. Mm-hmm. The Californians felt like they were being interrupted, and the New Yorkers felt like that the Californians weren't engaged, right? Because they weren't jumping in and reinforcing things. And to me, I understood it quite well, having grown up in New Jersey and then living most of my adult life on the West Coast. I was like, yeah, I know that problem. But what's interesting there is that we still don't really even understand what things mean to us. Like, I feel like we're still discovering that. And so my question to you is a little bit of, how do you think about automating something like that when we're not sure what meaning means? How do you help a computer to figure out what something means to me to automate it to me?
Well, there's a couple of things there that I would like to go through. One is, first of all, I love that example of the Thanksgiving dinner. Certainly, having lived, as you say, on both coasts, and I'm from Chicago originally, and I also lived 12 years in Nashville. So I've experienced, I feel like, the full range of sort of macro cultures of the United States. And politeness is the rule of law in Chicago and Nashville. So you would definitely not be stomping on anybody's sentences. But I also feel like one important point there is, you use the escalator example. And of course, mechanical automation, that is true. You're looking for something that's, simple, repetitive, and it's one size fits all. And, you've kind of looked at a situation and decided every single person who's on this floor is going to need to get to this floor, an escalator is going to make that simpler for them. There are exceptions, like if they have a big stroller and then they need to take an elevator, that sort of thing, or if they just want the exercise and they can take the stairs. But the edge cases are not that hard in a situation like that. Whereas I think when you're looking at scenarios like, how are you going to, open a bank account, and how is that going to play out for someone who is new to banking, like this is the first time they've opened a bank account, versus someone who, maybe is opening this for their business or whatever. And maybe that's not even a good example because it's not a particularly automation necessary kind of thing, but I think the difference is really, once you're including algorithms in the automation process, once you're looking at intelligent automation, then almost by definition, you're allowing for there to be variation that meets with, these kind of either with different, cohorts or personas that you've designed for, or on a very personalized, this is what you did as you pathed in, and so you're being offered a very personalized, algorithmically optimized sort of version of your experience. And I think my thing that I mentioned in the book that you're quoting there is that I am concerned when we think about the typical way that we think about automation is that it's always about automating the most mundane things. It's always about thinking about, okay, here are these mundane, tedious tasks that you have to do all the time. So let's automate those so that they can get out of your way, so they can be off your plate. And now you can think about higher order things, and you can, focus on the things that require more nuance. And that's completely fair. And I think that that's 100% valid way to go about automation. But I also think that we need to be thinking about what happens when that's the only way that we've approached automation. If all the automated tasks and functions and experiences that we ever encounter have simply been automated from a place of mundanity and meaninglessness, then I feel like we're going to have a very bleak sort of surroundings. Every interaction that we have feels like it would be automated from a place of very blunt, curt, emotionless kind of efficiency, as opposed to trying to think about what's the context of someone encountering that moment, and how could you make it more delightful, more relevant, more contextually appropriate in some way. And once we do that, then we are thinking about meaning, and then we're bringing meaning into that design process, into that strategy, into the automation, and that algorithm can account for the emotional load that someone may be bringing into that situation, and can use more kind of softer language, or a gentler flow of the work steps or whatever, where it gets maybe a checkout process that gets broken down into simpler tasks, as opposed to, a whole long page of things that's daunting. There's just so many examples of this kind of thing. And I feel like it's going to be a great opportunity the more we move into an intelligent automation sort of life cycle of business in the next, few years and beyond. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to begin to approach things not only with that lens of how can we make the mundane more automated so that it's out of our way, but also how do we make sure that we're not only creating these mundane experiences in the world around us.
Yeah, well, if you jump to right at the other end of that spectrum and say that meaning is, some of our meaning comes from our interactions with other people and our connections with other people. What have you seen around this, around your process and successful application of your process around automating that human connection, if you like, using technology to advance the human connection?
Yeah, what I've seen there that's been really fascinating for me is that I've seen exceptions built in, which are things like, if someone's using conversational AI to enhance a call center, for example, so that or a support center, so that maybe you have some chat-based interactions that are, facilitating some of the more common things like I lost my password and I need support on that. Those types of functions, or there's a utility outage and everybody just kind of wants to know, is there in fact a utility outage? Yes, there is. People are, the company's on it. We'll get you an ETA as soon as we can. Those kinds of sort of brute force handlings of things are, perfectly valid for conversational AI. And I think where you start to see the opportunity to bring this more human to human facet into it is when things are more complex or more emotional, like there's something in the process, in the question that a person is bringing to support that is saying, gosh, this is a really hard situation. I'm facing eviction, or some loved one died and the account was in their name, or whatever. There's these very emotional kinds of situations that could be happening, and you certainly wouldn't want, at this point in our history, I don't think that we would want those kinds of interactions to be completely done by machines. I think most people, when asked about this, agree that it would be better to have people handling those kinds of interactions. And so there's an escalation process that typically, or a diverting process that happens from the simplest kind of script-based AI, script-based chatbots or whatever, that once it hits a certain exception point, it might flag over and say, all right, we need a human agent to get on the line or to get, in this chat to make sure that this person, this customer, this whatever is being taken care of in a human-centric kind of way, in a respectful kind of way. And so I think that's really encouraging to me when I see that approach being taken, and I try and encourage that as much as possible. And I've seen a few. The utility example was one that came readily to mind because there's a utility company in South America that had taken my guidance on that, and they put that into their call center. So it's really exciting to think that there are entities all over the world that are improving the way that they're doing interactions with the humans who interact with their business, because they're trying to think about, how do I make sure that this is more respectful to humans and brings that kind of human meaning into the interaction, while increasing the efficiency on the front end on those kind of usual use cases as well.
Did that particular example, did that change come up in the CSAT, customer SAT scores and things, or did the other things pop up in terms of the back-end metrics, if you like, the result?
Yeah, so this was actually a situation where they had the opportunity to improve the scores and the efficiency, like the workflow efficiency of the call center, and they were looking for how to do that. And the way that we arrived at was to put kind of chatbots and other conversational AI in place to take those most common scenarios. And their customers were wildly supportive and happy about the efficiency that they were encountering there. But then use this escalation kind of exception type of approach for these more nuanced kinds of cases. And what they did is, instead of, I think a lot of people would become concerned, like, wait, that sounds like they're replacing human jobs then. And, ultimately that may end up being true. But in the short term, what they're able to do is take some of the additional capacity, human resource capacity, out of those handling the incoming calls, and have them learn how to become an analyst training the chat bot and training the conversational AI. So looking at these exceptions that become flagged and starting to write in some different kind of scripts and handling for these exceptions so that it becomes more nuanced, because nuance is meaning. And that's something humans do really well, whereas machines are not so good at that. Not yet.
It's interesting to think about this sort of handoff from machine to human and recognizing that we today have a greater opportunity of having a meaningful interaction when it's human to human than human to machine. Do you have a way of thinking about where the limitations are of a machine to human interaction today? I mean, we see that there's changes coming in the future, but when you think about this utility or others, like, what is there a way to think about? Well, this is where the handoff needs to happen, to be able to have a truly meaningful, interaction.
Yeah, I think it does come from these. You'd have to have a strategy up front that recognizes the difference between so-called normal cases, in the sense of these are the most common. And a lot of, if it's a call center, for example, they have this. They know what the volume of the vast volume of their calls are about. They can break everything down into, their sort of frequently asked questions. And they're flagging that kind of stuff anyway. Everything's kind of getting categorized and bucketed into, these are the password requests, these are the account close requests, these are whatever. And so they have a sense of which are going to be the simplest and, the sort of least likely to have any kind of complication that results from emotional complexity or trying to think how else to express that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think they know that password changes is very likely to be a very simple affair. And what it turns out to be, and I don't know if you must have seen this in the book, that there's a chapter I did in a separate essay on whether people want to know that they are interacting with a chatbot. And that I think that's one of the interesting areas of this that's emerging. And I think these attitudes are changing, evolving over time. But for the most part, people, their attitudes in surveys represented that they didn't really care that much whether they were interacting with a chatbot or other machine-based intelligence if their problem was being handled efficiently, and that's all that really matters. So if efficiency is the real focus of the outcome, then by all means, give me the most efficient way to handle my situation. But if handling the situation efficiently is something I want, but I also want to make sure that, my feelings are taken into account, and that I'm either angry because something went wrong with my service and I want someone to hear me. I want to make sure that another human hears my complaint and acknowledges me. I mean, those are the kinds of situations. And I think they're usually for a mature, sophisticated call center, there are things that people already know reasonably well they can break out if you've got a strategist and analyst, who can break those things out. It's a little trickier when you're, starting up a new business perhaps, and you're trying to figure out, from scratch, how are you going to divide these things up? But I think, you go into it with trying to, design it as best you can and know that it's going to be an iterative process. So that's one of the things about IHED, integrated human experience design, is that I intentionally define the term design as an iterative process. It is entirely about trying to get something right and then knowing that you probably didn't get it 100% right, and just having a process whereby you're looking for data, you're looking for metrics that can tell you how close did you get, where did you not get it? Let's go back and try it a different way. So I think chatbots and that sort of thing are a great example of a place where you're going to need to have an iterative approach to design, for sure.
I'm reminded of it's in a banking situation, a bank that we worked with in Asia Pac, that had some surprising results in their call center, where their youngest customer base, I can't remember which age bracket it was at the moment, but it was,
I think the median was like 24.
Yeah. Which is mostly a digital generation, mostly used to doing things on their phone, using apps to do everything. They would actually call the bank call center to check their balance. They actually wanted to talk to a human. And we caught them in a moment of it being really quite counterintuitive and being confusing, but it's an interesting, it's a story that I like because it reminds you that sometimes humans act unpredictably. Right.
Yeah.
And so thinking about it as a designer, where the purpose of being a designer is to make things work, you have to start by going back and figuring out, well, what is it that the humans actually really want? In this.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good moment to remind ourselves of the sort of the Druckerism, the Peter Druckerism that, there's no such thing as an irrational customer. They're doing what's rational for the context that they're in. So someone calling to check their balance and really wanting to hear someone's voice telling them their balance is not irrational. It makes sense as long as you can find the context. And I think that that's the challenge for designers, for strategists, for anyone who's in the business of experience creation and trying to kind of make these kinds of things make sense between technology, between business and humanity, with technology as the kind of go-between, is really trying to figure out what makes that rational. How do I understand this as, giving credit to the human that this is a rational decision?
Well, and it doesn't even have to be rational to be right, is what you're saying. It's like, emotions aren't the opposite of rational thinking, or and intuition isn't the opposite of rational. They can all be rational in a particular context. I'm interested in one of the things that we talk a lot about with AI and with humans is, a lot of humans will acknowledge that they don't really know what they want. It's constantly, life is this constant series of decisions and choices. And many times we have these preferences that are either latent or innate or not there. And this process of forming preferences and of getting to know your own mind, right? And then we have artificial intelligence coming in, being pretty sophisticated at knowing us. And in some cases, being able to measure things beyond our conscious awareness. Scientifically valid versus not yet proven to be scientifically valid in some cases. And yet this preference formation and this interaction with AI and how we make those choices, and therefore how we find meaning in, could be anything, a purchase off a recommendation engine, or a movie that we watch, or the direction we take off of Google Maps, whatever. There's so many examples. When you're thinking about meaning and human agency, how are you thinking about the interaction between artificial intelligence knowing us better than we know ourselves and pushing us perhaps in different directions?
Yeah, I think it's one of the great questions right now, because I think there is this one example for that illustrates this, I think, just perfectly, which is that up and down, Google, Facebook, all of the big providers of ad platforms swear that they are not, in fact, listening to your ambient audio to inform their ad strategies, right? Every one of us has a story in which we feel like we've been creeped on by our phones, at least, or whatever listening device there is. Every one of us has what feels like a really, really compelling story that, gosh darn it, just proves that they're listening in and serving us ads. And data scientists will tell us, and you know this, that it is in fact possible to construct very, very compelling targeting from just the behaviors that are, kind of around us, that the behaviors, the ways that we go through the world, the people that we interact with, the other things that we like and say and do, that are all already signals to the ad platforms. Those are perfectly sufficient to be able to serve up what seem like coincidental ads. Now, bear in mind, I'm not saying that these platforms are 100% not snooping on us, because I think that that remains to be cleared up completely. But I do think it's interesting that it is mathematically or statistically possible to serve up what seem like coincidences, like strong coincidences, that you would be shown an ad for something that relates to something you were just talking about, but you're not really aware of how many other signals you've already given off that you would be receptive to that thing that you're being shown an ad for. So I think that's the thing that's really complex for people, is that we don't understand the many ways in which we give off data, and how that data is available to how many different kinds of platforms, and to advertisers, and to whatever else, experience creators, and how right on the money they could end up being about serving us content or experiences. And I do think that it is a little troubling. It is a little it's obviously troubling for people, because there's this whole conspiracy about, being snooped on. And so I think we are not quite ready culturally, societally, for machines to be able to offer us content and experiences that we didn't even know we wanted. Like that feels like it's a little pushing us past our readiness at this point. And I don't know how long it'll take for us to adjust to that. But I think certainly, algorithms are going to keep getting more sophisticated, and we're going to keep having new formats where data is collected, and formats where it's being served. And so, the more that we have facial recognition and other kinds of computer vision involved in it, and the more that we have Internet of Things, kind of ambient sensors and beacons and whatnot involved, I think that the more it's going to just feel like this is inescapable. We are completely surrounded by entities that can collect lots and lots and lots of little signals that we don't even realize we're giving off, and then serve us back lots and lots and lots of targeted content and experiences that we didn't even know we wanted. And that feels like it could get a little narcissistic. It could get a little, I think we're already seeing, I think it's pretty easy to see that we're already in an environment where we're experiencing the consequences of what that does politically to the world, especially the U.S. is experiencing it, but I think we're seeing it, all over the place, and in other countries as well. So this is definitely technology pushing past what I feel like we're culturally or societally ready for. And these are big questions. I think the capability is interesting to have, but we don't have the kind of social education that allows people to understand, in what ways they're participating in giving off signals, and in what ways they're being fed, targeted information or targeted experiences. So we need to catch up on that for sure.
Do you think we can find meaning just in correlation? Humans think in cause and effect. That's our native language, right? So we care about causality. We need to know why something happened. That's what our sense-making drive is.
Yeah.
We want that explanation. Machines aren't like that. Machines are, correlation machines. And a lot of it is undiscoverable to us. It's not readable by humans. It's readable by machine only.
Yeah.
How do you think about a new version of meaning if so much of our knowledge is now in machines?
That's a really cool, interesting question, and a great provocation. I feel like the correlation aspect of the way that you set that up, and what that implies about how we have to become better at existing without knowing. That feels like part of the key is that I think there's on one hand, humans, society, culture in general needs to be better educated about, the algorithms that are making decisions on our behalf, and how that works, and what we're doing to contribute to that. At the same time, to your point, an awful lot of what happens is correlation and not necessarily in this cause and effect relationship. And I for one, have always been pretty okay with living in a kind of ambiguity, unknown answers kind of state. I feel like more so than an awful lot of people that I encounter. And I don't know why that is. I don't know whatever made me that way, but I do recognize that that is an unusual attribute, and that it makes me less anxious about a lot of what I encounter in the world.
Were you described as an imaginative child?
Yeah, I would imagine so. But yeah, like, I think that's the thing, is that, when you can live with a certain amount of ambiguity, you're not going to be as anxious that things are inherently getting bad or getting worse all the time. And that's what I'm working on a book now that is about what I describe as strategic optimism. And it's the idea that, you can take this sort of rational, optimistic approach, because what you can do is look at the entire landscape of a situation and say that there are ways that this could go badly. There are also ways that this could go well. And as long as I understand that landscape, and as long as I'm working toward achieving the best possible things, and everybody I can, muster around me is working toward the best possible things, while also mitigating for the risk of the bad stuff that could happen, then that's the direction that we ought to be going. Like, that should be, there's no reason why we can't be having good outcomes if we're all focused on the good outcomes that we know could happen.
Just a closing question, and if you're giving a couple of pieces of advice to AI designers and AI practitioners, what would those be?
Well, the two things that are really kind of the same thing that I talk about with a lot of the audiences that I speak to is that whenever you think of data, think of people. Like, if you see the word data or analytics anywhere, I just encourage people to just swap in the word humans or people, because it's so easy to forget that those data points that you're looking at are almost always an abstraction of some sort of human behavior or need or intent or motivation or whatever. And then the other complementary piece to that, the second thing, is whenever you see the word technology, think human experience. Because so much of the time, that's really what we're talking about, is not just the abstract technology, but how it's going to meet people in practice, in the world, and what experience that's going to create for people. And I think these two lenses are, very grounding, and they bring us back, just easily, constantly bring us back to this very human-centric way of thinking and talking about this. And we need that. We need that all the time, because it's getting faster and faster. And we need to be sure that the decisions we're making are grounded in a human-centric way to think about things.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. We've really appreciated the time.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it. Solid state.